Okay.
Okay, so this is for all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael, speed of Shlema, and for Hashem's protection of all the security forces of Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, and Jews all over the world.
Amen.
Okay,
Right.
so let's continue with some of the themes of Pesach. I found on the Osamach website, I'm just trying to find something that is that's relevant. Okay, we've done the Seder, the Maror. Okay, so one thing in the okay, I'm just trying to find it there. Okay, there we go. So additional laws of Pesach. Okay, it says here the entire month of Nisan, neither Tachanun during the week nor Tzidchat Chav Tzedek on Shabbos afternoon is said. And when you do the second Ashrei, Uval Tzion, you don't, there's a paragraph after that you omit, and this is during the week of Chol HaMoed. So there's no Tachanun. During this time, we started saying the Svirah to Omer from second night Pesach, and it's a mitzvah to try to recite all nights without missing, leading up to Shavuot. And the Omer was actually a type of wheat offering. That's what it actually is, Omer, because Omer is as far as I know, Damon, you can correct me, a type of offering that's probably related to the harvest, which is Shavuot. And just remember for next year, one shouldn't eat matzah on Erev Pesach, and some people even don't stop eating it 30 days before Pesach. I know my dad likes eating matzah as crackers the whole year, and he knows, I told him, and he knows not to eat it like a couple of weeks before Pesach. So I know some people think it's like crackers. So what else is there to say? Yeah, okay, Sfirah Omer, count 49 days. Okay, okay, let's, anything, can I add one or two more things, or should we just continue tomorrow?
I'm just a little bit panicky about the amount of data that I've got left, guys.
Yes, no, that's fine. Tomorrow, you stop me. Okay, no.
Okay.
I'll continue tomorrow.
All right. Okay, so guys, you can all hear me? Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. So you all remember where we left off yesterday? I don't think I need to do a heck of a recap. I'm going to leave it under 120 seconds. Okay. So this is basically the story. Is that there was this whole case where Rav Yochanan objected to Rav Eliezer's premise that the term selling refers only to a sale that affects acquisition and consummates the theft. Rav Elazar obviously is saying that if there isn't a real sale that takes place, and it can only take place when the thief owns it, and how does he own it? When the original owner gives up hope of getting it back, and then he's able to sell it, or in that particular case, that's the real sale. Otherwise, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. And Rav Yochanan says it's not the case. He was saying in the case of kidnapping, the original, the person that's being kidnapped doesn't give up hope of being rescued. And yet we find in that case of kidnapping, if the kidnapper then sells his victim or does something with him, like getting him to work or holding him ransom for the family or selling him as a slave, he gets the death penalty. So that proves that you don't have to spare by the victim in order to make them liable. Furthermore, it's not a legal sale. So on both those avenues, just because it's not a legitimate sale doesn't mean there isn't the death penalty for kidnapping. And so too, if there's no legitimate sale by the buyer, it doesn't matter either way. Actually, there's a 4-fold or 5-fold payment because it's selling repeatedly, both for the act of theft or selling or slaughtering. So remember that the Gemara analyzed Rav Yochanan's position and said that it's clearly implied that Rav Yochanan holds that a thief who sells a stolen animal before despair is liable to the 4 and 5-fold payment. And it asked, as far as after despair, what's his position? And it's exactly the same. He holds the thief liable to the 4-fold and 5-fold payment. Reish Lakish disagreed. Why did Reish Lakish disagree? He said because he agrees that prior to the original owner's despair, the thief is liable because he's selling an item that isn't his. But the minute the original owner despairs, it now belongs to the thief, and he shouldn't be made to pay a 4 or 5-fold payment for selling or slaughtering the animal. Then Rav Yochanan brought a proof, and he said, look, if we looked at the Mishnah in 74b of Bava Kamma, if one stole an ox or sheep and he consecrated and afterwards he slaughters it, he pays the 2-fold payment. Why? Because he stole it from the home of the original owner, at which case, unless he does the right thing and return it, obviously there's going to be a minimum of a 2-fold payment. But it's asking, well then how come he doesn't pay the 4-fold or 5-fold payment? And you remember, guys, it said because he immediately took it to the base Hamikdash in order to consecrate the animal. And we were saying, well, listen, this is a bit of a problem, because if he did it before the owner's despair, then he can't take it to the Beit HaMikdash because it's not his animal that he can consecrate. Because we learned from the Pasuk in Leviticus, Vayikra chapter 27, verses 14, that, and the merciful one said in his Torah, if a man consecrates his house to be holy, meaning it has to be similar, it has to be something that's yours, can't steal somebody else's and have that consecration work. So the Gemara said then it's obvious that the Mishnah has to refer to a case where the thief consecrated and slaughtered the animal after the owner's despair. Okay? Now, if it's after the owner's despair, the only reason that he does not pay the 4-fold or 5-fold payment is that he consecrated the animal. And therefore, when he slaughtered the animal or donated it, either way it belongs to Hekdesh. But if he had not consecrated the animal, because remember that pasuk, it says, I don't know if you remember, if he steals from his fellow, which means his fellow Jew, but the minute he steals and gives it to Hekdesh, there's no longer that same sort of liability for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? So in that particular aspect, that's the only reason why he's getting off the hook. So this is proving that after despair, if it wasn't for the fact that he gave it to Hekdesh, he'd be liable for the 4 or 5-fold payment. And therefore, Rav Yochanan uses that as an example against Reish Lakish, because he said after despair, there's no liability for the 4 or 5-fold payment because the thief then acquires it. So Reish Lakish, so Rav Yochanan is bringing this Mishnah to say, no, not at all. It's after despair, and he would be liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. The only reason he's not is he gave it to Hekdesh. But this is a proof. If he didn't, he would certainly be liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Therefore, this is a proof against Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish says there's no 4 or 5-fold payment after the original owner despairs because it belongs to the thief. Okay, so now we're sitting with a position that Reish Lakish has to respond to this Mishnah. Otherwise, it's checkmate. It's game over for him. So how does he respond to it? Do you guys remember, or must I tell you? Okay.
Tell me.
All right. Good.
So I wasn't going to get that. I'm listening to that.
So Reish Lakish says, look, what are we dealing with here? In a case where the original owner, rather than the thief, consecrated it while it was in possession of the thief. So we're saying, like, what are you talking about here? Okay, like it doesn't make sense. So Reish Lakish interprets the Mishnah to mean he's using pronoun differently to Rav Yochanan, because Rav Yochanan reading, if one stole and he consecrated it and he slaughtered it, he pays a 2-fold payment, but he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold. Reish Lakish says, no, I don't read it like that. If one stole meaning the thief, and he, not the thief, but the owner consecrated it, and then the thief slaughtered, he pays the twofold, but he doesn't pay the fourfold or fivefold. So that does make sense, except for one little problem. And that problem is very, very clear, because Rav Yochanan said, well, then does the animal really become consecrated? Because if a thief stole, if there was a thief, right, and he stole some property and the owner didn't despair of recovering it, neither of them guys own it. The thief doesn't own it, nor the owner own it. Why? And neither of them can consecrate it, because there's a problem. The thief can't consecrate it because the original owner hasn't despaired of getting it back. Okay? And the original owner cannot consecrate it because it's not in his possession. So they're both sitting with the problem. So he's saying to Shlokish, it's all very nice. You're saying, okay, so the original, the thief stole it from the original owner, but the original owner consecrated it. And therefore, that's why there's no 4 or 5-fold payment, as far as that's concerned, because it was almost a way to get the thief out of paying a 4 or 5-fold by almost lessening the blow. So you'd have to pay the money, but not to that extent, because the original owner wanted to donate it to Hegdish. This thief just saved him a trip. So we're saying, how's this possible? How is it possible that you can actually consecrate something, sell something, or even manipulate it in any way when it's not in your possession? That's the question that came up. Does the question make sense? From Rav Yochanan.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Rav Yochanan's got a very good question. He's saying, great, I hear the theory. How are you going to make it work? You know, the thief doesn't own it. Original owner didn't give up getting it back. There's no dispute. I get that. But then the original owner, how can he do anything with it if practically it's not in his hands? So the Gemara said, Reish Lakish says his explanation in accordance with the discrete ones. So what's this issue of the discrete ones? Okay, so what we're saying is there is a Mishnah, Ma'aseh Sheni in chapter 5, verse 1, and basically it said, with respect to Kerem Revei, I'm sure Revei, as I said to Kevin, comes from the word Revi, but it's pronounced Revei. If I looked at the Aramaic, I looked at the English translation, so it says the discrete ones place down the coins and say whatever was picked from the vineyard shall be deconsecrated onto these coins. So let me just refresh your memory in terms of what the situation is. Keren Revei is a vineyard in its 4th year. I said to you yesterday, like upshearing, where people don't cut their hair until after a certain period of time, until after the child is 2 years old. So immediately after, it comes from this, that you can't use during the first 3 years of its growth the produce of a grapevine, an orla, which is an orchard, and many, many other sort of fruit trees. So the produce of the vine in its 4th year is known as a revei. And it has the same sanctity as Ma'aseh Sheni, which is the second tithing. And it can only be eaten in Jerusalem. So if you look at so basically, if you look at the manner in which Ma'aseh Sheni can be deconsecrated, it's the same with Kerem Revei. So what happens is you can say, look, this particular amount of grapes is worth 4 coins. I'm going to give these 4 coins, and those 4 coins will be given to somebody in Jerusalem so they can buy produce in Jerusalem and eat it on my behalf inside Jerusalem. And then that item in its 4th year doesn't have to go and be eaten all the way in Jerusalem. It's deconsecrated. So they're known as redemption coins, because they redeem the produce fit to be eaten in the 4th year, but they have to deconsecrate the actual fruit or vegetables Otherwise, they can't be consumed out of Jerusalem. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. So what's happening is this, what's this issue with the discrete ones? Okay, so what we're saying is as follows, is that there's a group of pious people, they don't want other people to commit averas and sin, and those people that had stolen a fourth-year vineyard, and they were concerned because the passers-by are now contravening two acts. Firstly, they're taking grapes that have not been redeemed yet, so it's you're not allowed to use it before it's been redeemed in the fourth year. There's a process. In other words, so they have to be deconsecrated with coins. Those coins in lieu of the grapes have to be taken to Jerusalem, produce bought and consumed there, and therefore on that fourth year, those grapes can be eaten outside Jerusalem. So not only are they stealing, but they're having my shiny equivalent out of Jerusalem. So there's a double sin. So these religious people didn't want them to sin. These special pious discreet ones, they said they were discreet because some people do their mitzvahs and say, I donated 10 million rand to the shul, but they need a band and a procession and everything else, because if they do it in secret, it would kill them. It would kill them to do the tzedakah in secret. They want the notoriety, the fame, the fortune, whatever goes with it. And the kavod, the honor. Kevin had the perfect wording. Why? Because unfortunately, many people have told me that are gabbais at big shuls, and even some of the religious shuls, is that people after many drinks on Simchat Torah promise the world, and when it comes down to paying, they hardly collect the money. They don't even collect it on a small monthly debit order. These people just don't keep their word, which is shocking. But they mix a couple of drinks with public honor, and you've got a disaster. Anyway, these great men, these pious, discreet ones, they know these people are thieves, but they say maybe there's extenuating circumstances, maybe they're poverty-stricken, so let me not create a double sin. Let's pay that on their behalf so that they're not stealing. I've given it to them. They're not creating sins of eating things that can only be eaten within Jerusalem that have to still be redeemed. So they're bailing them out of trouble. Okay? So basically, how does this even relate to Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish? Because this is how the process worked, is that they would place down coins in the evening and say any grapes that people picked today should now be redeemed with these coins. So evidently they maintain that although grapes stolen by a passerby are no longer in their possession, their ownership is not
frozen again.
Okay. All right. So, all right. I'm just going to repeat what I said before.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So basically, they go in the evening and they say any grapes that people pick today shall be redeemed with these coins. So they maintain that although the grapes are stolen by a passerby, and the grapes aren't in their possession, guys, their ownership
is not working well.
What's going on now?
We can. You keep crackling up all the time, man. We can barely.
2 seconds.
For how long? Has it been for the whole year?
No.
Just the last 10 minutes or so. We were talking about the grapes, and then you disappeared. Then you came back, and you disappeared. It was like fading in and out.
All right.
Fading in and out on the voice and freezing on the face as well. But
all right. Can I try again now?
Yeah. Just on the plate.
All right. So look, these pious ones basically went in the evening, and they turned around and said, whoever took the produce during the day, these coins have to deconsecrate their produce, so they're not committing sins, and they've been bought, and they basically get to own the grapes. There's no thievery. There's no eating the kerem reveh, which you're not allowed to eat until they've been taken to Jerusalem and eaten there live unless they're deconsecrated by coins. But this whole issue that's coming up is how can you, if something is not in your possession and was stolen during the day, in the evening say, I'm placing these coins and I'm releasing them since they're not in your possession and not in your control. So the discrete ones maintain that although the grubs are stolen and are no longer in their possession, their ownership is not considered impaired. That's the issue. So if something is no longer in their possession, their ownership is not considered impaired, and they remain full-fledged owners, and they're still empowered to redeem the fruits and transfer their sanctity onto coins that they set aside. So now this is the proof for Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish is saying, the original owner doesn't have to have the animal to basically consecrate it. Because Rav Yochanan says, listen, how can he consecrate it if it's not in his physical possession or control? Reish Lakish says, I'll bring you a Mishnah from Maaseh Shena, chapter 5, verse 1. You don't need it in your possession in order to consecrate or deconsecrate anything or sell it. That's the proof. That's what he's saying. Do you understand the argument, guys, of his defense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's not that difficult. You just have to follow. Okay. So the Gemara now questions Reish Lakish, but if the Mishnah refers to where the owner consecrated the animal, why does it rule that the thief pays the twofold payment? Okay. In other words, it's saying, okay, fine, Reish Lakish, we'll give you this. Let's just say that's the case. But then the thief should only, as the Gemara says, pay the principal to the owner. In other words, I'm the original owner. Somebody stole it and took it to the Beis HaMikdash to redeem, consecrate. Okay? And in that particular case, I wanted to take it to the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore I say that that's great, that's redeemed. So then the question is, why then would the thief have to pay the twofold since we're on the same page and we have the same goal? Does that make sense? So in other words, Reish Lakish is saying that it's definitely after the fact, because so this is the question. If it's before the fact, there's no discussion with Reish Lakish because he said there is a 4 or 5-fold payment. They're saying after the original owner gives up hope of retrieving it. Okay. After the original owner gives up hope of retrieving it, on that basis, then the thief doesn't owe the 4 or 5-fold, as far as that's concerned. So then, obviously, Rav Yochanan brings in this consecration and says, well, in order for it to be consecrated, it has to be after the despair. Otherwise, you can't consecrate what isn't yours. I'm just giving you a summary. Otherwise, you would owe the 4 or 5-fold. And he's saying no. In that particular case, the original owner hadn't despaired of getting it back. In fact, even though it was taken out of his possession, he consecrated it. When the thief stole it, he then went to go and consecrate it anyway out of his own thing. It just so happens that we're on the same page in terms of their goals. So then the Gemara says, okay, so then why would there be a 2-fold payment? Because at the end of the day, it's like he returned it to his owner. Because the owner wanted to take it to Ektesh, and therefore they're on the same page. So the Gemara then brings that the reason why it says is not just the principal return to owner, is that this is the case, according to Reish Lakish, where the thief had been sued in court prior to the owner's consecration. Meaning the minute there are witnesses that come and testify that they saw the thief steal it from the person's home and take it to the Beit HaMikdash, at that particular point, it's at the point of no return and goes to court. So therefore, due process is, unless you come clean to the original owner and say, listen, I waited for you to despair, but there's no witnesses, nobody knows I have it, you didn't even know I had it, and I wanted to take it, to sacrifice it after despair. So I've done that. And the original owner says to him, listen, not only do I forgive you, but I wanted to take it there as well. But you did steal from me. Just give me back the original amount. Unfortunately, there were witnesses in between, and it now actually went to court. And then obviously everything got revealed at that point. So the original owner has to take back both the principal as well as the penalty, which is equal to the compensatory amount. So the Gemara asks, what is the case? If the judges say, go pay him, why did the Tana discuss the case in which he consecrated the stolen animal? So what does it mean, go pay him? The term Amad Badin it means he was sued in court. In other words, whenever the judges say, go pay him, it's an issue, it's a verdict that's been issued. So the minute that is said, there's no question there has to be a payment. Okay. Now the question that goes is as follows. So why did the Tana discuss the case in which he consecrated the stolen animal? Even if he did not consecrate the animal, we should also not make the thief liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. Do you hear the question, or do you want me to repeat the question, guys? I want you to understand what it is.
If the animal was consecrated, then there shouldn't be.
7 minutes left. So you all followed me at a very certain point where it says, okay, so if we hear it according to Reish Lakish about the fact that you don't need to have it physically in front of you in order to still have control, we understand then why the thief only has to pay back the original amount to the owner. But why would he have to pay back? If that's the reason why you're saying there's no four or fivefold, then what's the reason that you say that there's no twofold? That there's you should say there's no twofold. Why is there twofold? So the twofold is it actually went to court. In other words, witnesses came, and all of this came out in court, and they came to some arrangement saying, look, although the original owner did despair, his intention was to take it to the Beit HaMikdash, and the thief ended up doing it. So he said, I'll tell you what, I agreed to give it to Hekdesh. You took it to me you have to pay me twice, but at least it's not four or fivefold, because they're witnesses now and you've troubled the court. If you'd have come to me and told me the story, you would have only had to pay the principal. But because you actually just kept quiet, you've now got to at least pay the minimum. Okay, that's clear. So then the question comes, if that is the case, and the judges say, go pay him, in other words, they issued the final verdict, why did the Tana even discuss a case in which he consecrated the stolen animal? Because if you take that aspect out of it, even if he didn't consecrate the animal, you shouldn't be able to make the thief liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. You don't even have to bring this issue of consecration. Why? Because remember, Rava said, we discussed this yesterday, if the court said to the thief, go pay him, and then the thief slaughtered or sold the ox or the sheep he had stolen, he's not liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. What's the reason? Since they issued a final verdict on the matter and he slaughtered or sold the animal, he's doing so as a robber rather than a thief, and the robber does not pay the four or fivefold payment. So this was discussed with Kevin yesterday. So what we are saying is as follows, is that basically, once the court established through its final verdict that the animal in his possession belongs to the original owner, his original act of theft is considered terminated. And now the stolen animal is viewed, guys, just as a deposit. So basically, the thief has to return it to the original owner and then obviously pay the penalty of the same value. So the case is closed. Okay, that's according to the Ravad. Now, when that's the Ravat's commentary in the Gemara. So when the thief decides at that point, he's not going to even return the animal, he's going to slaughter it and or sell it or whatever the case may be, at that point it's not an act of theft, it's an act of robbery, and therefore there's no four or fivefold payment. He just has to return the value of that animal. Why? Because we said a thief, you don't know his identity. But if it's already gone to court, that thief that decided to keep it cheekily and slaughter it, in that particular case, you know who his identity is, who had caught with him. And therefore he's deemed a robber. And a robber only has to pay back the principal and not a penalty. So he wouldn't have to pay a twofold penalty or a fourfold or fivefold penalty. However, we already established he has to pay the twofold penalty because of that first case that he lost that was now concluded. And now he has to pay back probably the same equivalent of the animal for his act of robbery, since it's a new case. He's actually, instead of paying 4 or 5 times, I don't think he's only paying twice. I actually think he's paying 3 times. Does that make sense? Because this is a new case of robbery, since we know his identity. So he's actually paying 3 times as opposed to 4 or 5 times. But the Gemara is just saying, then why bring in a whole case of consecration when in fact you could have just got out of it using this method of basically saying that it was slaughtered and sold after the case. So the Gemara has to answer it. So what it ends up saying, and I've got 2 minutes, is if the court merely said to him, you're obligated to pay him, and the thief slaughtered or sold it, he pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. What's the reason? Because they didn't issue a final verdict on the matter. He's still considered a thief. So then can Reish Lakish then be referring to where the court actually said go pay him? Why then would the Mishnah have to exempt the thief from the 4 or 5-fold payment on the basis that the animal is consecrated? So the Gemara says, look, there's no difficulty. Reish Lakish will say that it's necessary for the Mishnah to state its ruling where the judges merely said to him, you're obligated to pay him. And after there was a slaughtering or a consecration, in that particular case, they said, listen, we've had enough of you, and now this whole thing is going to trial. So that's why the other issue doesn't come up. But the whole reason the Gemara brings this as an example is it says that Reish Lakish is basically stretching the parameters here of having everything working in theory, and it doesn't all work out like that. So it says, like Rav Yochanan, so far, just seems a cleaner, more logical approach. In other words, Reish Lakish is using every other thing to defend his position, and he's defended it well. He hasn't lost anything. But it's just, the Gemara did make a note saying at the bottom, some of the commentaries, that Rav Yochanan is a little bit more straightforward. And generally, according to Occam's razor, is we go with the simplest, most easygoing approach, generally. But Reish Lakish defended himself to a T. All right? Now, guys, I'm sorry about this. This was a repetition of yesterday. I don't think we did the wrong thing because although it was going to take a minute or two, I realized you guys